Welcome to the Savvy Dentist podcast with Dr. Jacquie Green, the show where great dentistry meets great business. Listen in each week as we bring you an inspiring person who will share their story, ideas and business techniques to help you create a practice and a life you love. And now introducing your host, Dr. Jacquie Green.
Hello everyone, it's Jacquie Green here. Welcome back to SavvyDentist.com and to the Savvy Dentist podcast. My guest today is Jaquie Scammel, and she is an expert when it comes to customer service. Her work has been featured in a ton of business publications ranging from Sky News to heaps of other ones as well. She's the author of 2 books, Service Habits and Service Mindset, and today we're going to be talking about how to embed a customer service culture. We all understand that customer service is much more than a fancy cup of coffee or a high five to the patient. It's about creating a culture where people are present, engaged and interested in what they're doing across a team. And we're going to be talking about customer service from a scaling point of view as well, because service businesses do scale. Now, before we get to that conversation with Jaquie, just a little promo for you. If you happen to own a dental practice and you want to find tools, tips and training that are going to help you on your journey to earning more from your practice, working less, creating a life that you love, as well as a business that you love, then head across to the Savvy Dentist Facebook group. You can find us at drjessiegreen.com/Facebook and come and join us. We'd love to see you there. We've got some tools, some training that will help you on your journey. Come and join the conversation, and we'd love to see you there. But for now, let's get on to our conversation with Jaquie. As always, you're going to want to have a pen and paper handy because there's some absolute pearls of wisdom that she shares in this conversation. I hope you enjoy it as much as I enjoyed talking to her. Here she is. Jaquie Scammel, thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to come and hang with us. How are you today?
I am great, thank you.
That's wonderful. And of course, we're recording this during lockdown, and you're in lockdown on the Mornington Peninsula down in lovely Victoria. So great place to be if you have to be locked down, but hopefully this lockdown lifts very soon.
Yeah, 11 weeks in, Jesse. It's a bit relentless, but we'll get there. Positive mindset.
Absolutely, we will. Now, Jaquie, your book, Service Habits, is a wonderful book, and I've heard lots of wonderful press about it. Before we dive into the contents of that book, I do want to just ask you, what led you to this space around customer service? What's the background there? Because again, you probably don't put that on your high school leaving, preference things. I'm going to be a customer service expert. How did that come about?
Yeah, well, I fell into my love of service when I went through the McDonald's system back in the late 80s and 90s. And realized very quickly that I just loved to serve. I loved customers. I loved all of the shenanigans and the interesting stuff that came up with interesting humans every day. And that really began the path of serving more in the major events and stadium space. So predominantly my corporate career, both private and public sector, before I was running my own business and writing books, was working in large stadiums like Wembley National Stadium, Emirates Stadium over in the UK, Melbourne Park here, home of the Aussie Open, where we had millions literally of customers coming through the gates and thousands of staff, and trying to mobilise and operationalise this thing called customer service. So, yeah, I fell in love with the people side of things, and that's really been my focus ever since.
I think that's fascinating. And again, we'll dive into some of those experiences in a moment. But before we do, I just want to unpack what great customer service actually is, because I know in dentistry, and indeed many small businesses, it can be conceived or construed as a bit of a high five with the patient as they come through the door, give them a nice cup of coffee in a fancy coffee cup, and hey, our service experience is done. And I obviously appreciate that it's much more than that. So I just wanted to really unpack what great customer service actually is, so that before we get into how to create it and what those habits might be, people understand what we're talking about. Could you give us a bit of an overview there?
Yeah, so having spent many years studying this and writing about it and speaking about it, I think the best way to define customer service is a balance of head and heart. So, we want to make sure that we leave people better than when we found them. And service is about removing the obstacles for people. And if you think about the head and heart combination, people are typically coming to your business, in this case, a dentistry practice, for solutions. So that's the head. And they're human. and they're coming for some heart. And the way I sort of like to explain heart is, you know, we all share the same design, no matter our background, who we are, what our needs are, what our education is. And that is that we want to be seen, we want to be heard, and we want to feel that we matter. And so customer service throughout every touch point, from the moment the booking is made to the moment they walk into the practice, throughout the whole experience in the chair, in the waiting room, and everything that happens afterwards, is about solving those problems, bringing solutions, and making sure that your customer feels seen, heard, and understood.
I really love that, and there's a heap of things we'll pull out of that in a moment, particularly around the idea of mapping touch points and understanding the customer journey in a moment. But the purpose of being seen, being heard, and feeling like they matter, again, it's a very human experience. And of course, as dentists, we're treating people, not teeth, which I know sounds like a funny thing to say out loud, but we have this tendency. We use magnifying loops as we're working. We're zooming right in on this tooth and the most intricate part of the tooth. And, of course, attached to that tooth is a person, right, with all the emotional stuff that goes with it. So I really appreciate that. So you spoke about touch points. So is it fair to say that one of the first things when it comes to curating a journey that's going to allow people to feel seen, heard, and that they matter is understanding what that journey is and identifying those touch points?
Yeah, I mean, sure. And look, one of the philosophies that I really stand by is that service is simple. So without making it complicated, we don't have to do these grandiose, journey mapping processes and exercises. We can do something as simple as, and it's a strategy that they taught us in the McDonald's system actually, is get outside of the counter and walk the restaurant as you would a customer and notice things through the customer's eyes. And I think that they used to call it the travel path actually back then. And I think that this is a great principle for all types of businesses. You know, think about even the toilet, the bathroom, like all these different areas that a customer may go to, and looking at it through the eyes of a customer and thinking about, well, how can we enhance that experience? And it can be as simple as that.
Yeah. Again, I think that's a really good mindset to be adopting as well, which is, be the customer, see it through their eyes. So, Jackie, with respect to customer service, I don't want to, certainly I believe that there's lots of great instances of customer service, but I'm also acutely aware that there are some instances of poor customer service, dealing with banks, telecommunications companies, to name a few, without naming names or naming and shaming on a podcast. But I want to ask, where did it go wrong in some of those cases? Why is it that sometimes our expectations have now been lowered to such an extent that when someone just treats us nicely, we suddenly go, oh my God, they're really nice?
It's such a great question. And look, I think that we've been trained to be highly efficient in our roles. Part of our conditioning in the workplace over the last, few decades has been to apply logic and systems and processes and rules, and to be so efficient that we sometimes forget and lose the very human qualities that make service, so important. And so there's an element of us of that getting in the way. And one of my absolute firm beliefs, and I'll probably reference this throughout our conversation, is that those who are extraordinarily present deliver the best service. And sometimes when we're stuck in our heads and we're stuck in the systems, the rules, the red tape, the logic of that transaction or that interaction, we actually forget who's in front of us.
Yeah.
And we miss those cues, those subtle, beautiful human cues that we give each other. And it's such an important thing to remember that there's a very strong link to being in the moment, being present to all of this experience, because that is what service is. It's about paying attention, noticing what this human needs in this moment, and all those subtle human qualities that a robot can't do. And it's funny you mentioned a bank, Jessie, because I had a very below average experience this week. Oh, so it's quite funny that you raised it. And it was one of those classic examples where I went in with a few challenges that needed fixing. And I actually left the bank with more problems than when I started with.
Oh, wow.
And to this day, I still have some challenges that I need to rectify. And it was just some classic things that didn't happen. You know, the employee that was looking after us, she didn't ask any questions. She simply just did what I needed without diving, just even any little discretionary effort, without diving further and asking a few more questions. There was no care. I may as well have been talking to a kiosk or a robot, you know.
Totally.
And so it just once again, and good on her. Yes, she probably was compliant and followed the rules and followed the systems, tick, tick, tick. And I walked out of there feeling less than human, actually. And my problems weren't solved. So I think I like to keep this conversation really simple because I think we've overcomplicated service.
So again, I really want to touch on that because I think you're absolutely right. Because one of the things, you know, in business, we talk about the importance of having a systemized business because it gives the owner the opportunity to have some leverage, or it's a form of leverage. We talk about having a self-managing team and a team that can have that discretion. But you're absolutely right. If we over-systemize the business and we follow the check boxes down the page and we tick, 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 again, we're following a process rather than that being present piece, which again, we will reference in a moment. I think you're absolutely right. You miss those cues. You miss actually, why did Jacquie come into the bank? What's the problem that we're trying to solve here? Rather than, you know, let me follow a process because that's the process. So I wanted to ask you this question around that. I've got a couple of questions around this. When it comes to service, and I agree with you, you know, we've overcomplicated things. How do we ensure consistency of outcome without over-systemizing it to get that checklist experience that you've just had? What's that balance like between head and heart? And then how do we not find ourselves in a position of relying on our one good team member who happens to understand it, whereas the others on our team may not be quite as present naturally or be engaged or have the same mindset? How do we replicate that experience?
Well, first, let me say that I absolutely support procedures, compliance. My background is such that I've come from highly regulated environments like food and beverage and stadia, where rules and systems need to be in place. When you're protecting customers and you're running major events with terrorism threats and things, there's got to be rules.
Yep.
And to your point, the challenge is always, particularly with businesses that have got multiple employees or a large number of employees, how do you create consistency amongst all of these employees? So there's a couple of things that enhance consistency. And I'm sure many of the listeners would agree with me, as business owners or practice owners or leaders, we don't want to leave success to chance. And so consistency, if we don't address consistency in service, we're leaving it to chance. And so some of the practical ways of ensuring that you get greater consistency is, first of all, from the very top, the leaders, there needs to be a clear set of behaviours that is understood, role modelled, and in every touch point of the employee experience, reinforced and, you know, given feedback on. So service behaviours is often a missing link in many organisations. I'm sure we've heard of organisations that set clear purpose, they have a clear set of values, but often what we forget to do is articulate explicitly how we expect people to behave. And those behaviours come from the values. And so the organisations that achieve the greatest consistency are those that have leaders role modelling and reinforcing throughout all of the employee touch points. This is how we expect you to speak. This is how we expect you to act. This is how we expect you to respond, deal with issues, complaints, compliments. And if we don't be explicit about how we expect people to behave, guess what? People come to work with their own set of values, their own set of beliefs, their own set of standards and expectations on how to behave, and we start to see inconsistency. So this is one of the very first foundational pillars. If I was truly going on a journey of trying to increase my consistency, I would be starting here and thinking about, have I clearly articulated how I want people to behave? And, you know, an example of that would be, if we want our employees to be friendly, and that's one of our values, it's something very simple we can all relate to. But your interpretation of friendly, Jessie, might be very different to mine.
Totally.
So we then need to expand that and say, and this is what friendly looks like.
Yep.
And it's not that we're patronizing, and it's not that we're, speaking to our staff like they're, naive. We're just being really clear in our business. This is what friendly looks like in action. I think it's a step that a lot of businesses sometimes, miss and overstep, but it's absolutely a sure way of getting consistency, because I'll finish on this point with this question. It only takes one employee to have a bad day, and like it or not, how a customer feels about that interaction with that one employee is how they feel about your business.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And so we've got to address this consistency of behavior, and this is where it comes back to being present, because if our employees are not switched on in the moment, present with what is, they may, miss a lot of important cues that customer's giving them.
There's so many golden threads I want to touch on here, because for the people listening to this podcast who happen to be clients of ours, you'd be familiar with the culture creation telescope when we talk about these lenses that we look through. And you've mentioned a couple of them already, and you've spoken about values, understanding what your values are, understanding what the behaviors are that support those values. But one of our other lenses we talk about, which is going to be a lovely little segue, which is habits, right? What are the habits around those behaviors? And so I wanted to ask you about these service habits that would be integral to creating a service-based culture. So I know that that's the topic of your book, and you've just given me a beautiful segue to it, which is fantastic, totally unplanned, which is awesome. So can we talk about some of these habits? Because I think if we're going to create consistency, we do want to develop the habit, right? And what we do day by day by day to create that culture. So could we just start by talking about what those habits look like, please?
Yeah. So I've developed 27 service habits, and if you think of the famous How to Win Friends and Lose Them by Dale Carnegie, it sort of was inspired by that. All of these different types of tips and tricks that we need to do to develop a service culture. But these 27 service habits sort of sit in three clusters, if you like. So the first cluster of habits is all around developing greater self-awareness for employees. Mm-hmm. The second cluster of habits is all around how do we deeply understand others, so the people we're serving. And the third cluster of habits is all around how do we balance our emotions when we're dealing with difficult situations. Mm. And those three pillars actually make up what we're familiar with, the term emotional intelligence. So these 27 habits strengthen the muscle and the skill of EQ, and they also morph into social intelligence, what transpires when we're interacting with somebody else. And why I love habits is because I guess from my own experiences in life, habits require a certain amount of discipline, practice.
Yeah.
One of the greatest myths about service is that, let's make this a customer service project. And I always say, no. This is a practice. Every day we're practicing this. And so habits have got this feeling and energy around, they require daily focus. And what I also love about the idea of habits is that they're small little steps. They're tiny little tweaks. But when we add them all up, they actually create this shift, this swell in the way people treat each other. So we start out small with the self-awareness piece, which makes sense. Then we look at the understanding of others. So we look at habits around empathy and questions and the way we notice other people and how we interact. And then those third lots of habits are really then where the rubber hits the road. So when we're dealing with complaints or challenges, or we're stressed or we're tired, what are some habits to strengthen our response versus our reaction? And yeah, they're kind of, I think most of them are quite evergreen, to be honest, Jessie. I don't feel that they'll ever grow out of fashion because they kind of grow their own legs, and everyone sort of, what I've noticed over the years as we teach these habits is that sometimes habits are more important for others at a certain point in time than they are for their colleague, for example. And then 6 months later, they go, actually, I really need to strengthen that habit right now. I'm going to go back to that. So there's a moving fluidity about them as well, which is really interesting.
It's a really interesting thing that you talk about there. And again, one of the things we spoke about is the ability to respond rather than to react. And again, that comes back to that mindfulness or being present in the moment. And again, I know that's a big theme that runs through your work, is being present. And I know that, you practice mindfulness and so on as part of that. And I also know that part of your training involves that as well. Mm-hmm. So I wanted to actually just unpick that being present or mindfulness, whatever language we want to put around that, and help me understand from your end how that shows up on a day-to-day basis. We get the concept. I totally understand it. But how do we do that on a practical level when you've got phones ringing, people coming through the door, a million things happening, and then remembering to stay grounded, centered, and focused? Can you just walk me through a few things there, please?
Yeah, so one of the habits that we teach in the very first cluster is the 4 seconds rule. And so this is inspired by an author, Peter Bregman, who wrote the book 4 Seconds. And the whole premise of it is that it takes 4 seconds to take a breath. So you breathe in and you breathe out. And the reason we introduced this so early into the service habits is because it literally only takes 4 seconds for you to start sending a signal to your brain that it's time to just rest for a moment and get some perspective. And so those 4 seconds is a pause, breathe, and an opportunity to do a course correct. Catch your thoughts and see them and get some objective, you know the word, objectivity.
Objectivity? Is that the word we're looking for?
Objectivity.
There we go. That's cool. That happens to me too.
Of the thought or the feeling that you're having. And it's interesting because that habit seems to be one of the most impactful early on in the journey, where a lot of employees go, yeah, I just need to practice the 4 seconds rule a little bit more. I just need to know that it's okay to take a breath, to take a mindful, intentional pause and maybe choose again, choose a different way. And so that's a very simple example of how we bring mindfulness into the habits, but it's building self-awareness muscle, self-awareness of their thoughts and their emotions, but also giving them a choice that they can choose a different way of behaving in this moment. Another one of our habits that's very strongly linked to the mindfulness stuff is imagine your thoughts are totally transparent. So that's one of the service habits. And it really creates a lot of interesting noise and conversation in the workshops. But it's a bit of light tongue in cheek, and it's sort of suggesting that if you're in front of a customer and you're having a thought that's completely misaligned and not congruent with what you're doing or saying in that moment, energetically, it's going to feel off.
Yeah.
They're going to feel that you're not fully there. You might be there in body, but they might just sense that you're someplace else. And so again, this is giving our employees at all levels an opportunity to explore how being present really is one of your superpowers in customer service.
Yeah, I love that. It's really interesting that you talk about that, and it reminds me of a client that I used to work with, a lovely, lovely couple up in Brisbane, and a bit of a plug here for Be Well Dental, and they embody this so beautifully. When I think of what you're talking about, their faces come to mind. And what I love about what they've been able to do with their practice is they've been able to grow a really mindful-based practice where there's that absolute presence in the moment. There is that 4 second rule. Yes, like every practice, I'm sure they have their challenges on a day-to-day basis. But I know that by, reputation within the community, it's a practice where people feel seen, heard, and that they matter, right? And it's that thing that you spoke about. So I think it's so really cool. I want to just ask a few questions in a little bit of an ad hoc manner, but I promise I'll tie them together in a moment. But one of the things that I've noticed at the moment is, we spoke about the banks a little while ago and having that experience. And it seems to me that in some quarters of our industry, the dental profession, there's a push to a more transactional, low cost, high volume type of model. And that's one way of doing business. No right or wrong. Yeah, that's totally cool. But if you want to have something that's not so transactional and it's more relationship based, Can you help me understand what the outcome from a commercial point of view, from a personal fulfillment point of view is if you get this right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think of a value model that I refer to often. There's sort of below the line is the expected, right?
Yeah.
So in business, what we expect is good price, convenient, or speed, however you want to talk about it, and quality.
Yeah.
And customers expect that for what they pay and for what they've been told to believe. And then there's above the line what we would call the unexpected. And the unexpected is the emotional connection piece. And we've all felt that, where we've gone to a product or we've gone to buy a product, we've gone to have a service from a business, and we've gone in with a level of expectation, and we've walked away feeling like it was exceeded and that we were really cared for and treated for like someone that mattered, like a human, not a number.
Yeah.
And the benefit of that from a commercial business point of view is the loyalty. And so there's a term that I like to talk about, which is called cumulative advantage. Yep. And what that means, it's far beyond a competitive advantage. Competitive advantage is great price, great product, great quality. But a cumulative advantage is this, it's got this sense of like, the way interest sort of builds up in a bank account. It just accumulates over time. And when I walk away from an experience feeling cared for and feel like, you remember my name, you remember some of my challenges, you remember my life story, and you're really interested in me, and I feel like a human, I'm going to come back time and time again, and I'm going to tell my friends, and I'm going to tell my family, and I'm a true believer. I'm a follower. And that's the loyalty that I really believe right now more than ever businesses could leverage from. In fact, chasing new customers might not be the right strategy right now. Nurturing existing customers, really nurturing them could be, where the effort is going to give you the greater rewards. So it's that above the line emotional connection, which is going back to that balance of head and heart, and knowing that people really value that.
Absolutely. And in fact, we are both singing from the same hymn sheet here. I wrote a book about this called Retention a while ago, and I'm with you that I think there's so many gains to be made by nurturing your existing customers, or in our case, patients, so that they stay in the practice and they refer plentifully and so on and so forth. And you're right, that concept of what we refer to as feeling noticeably cared for, when it's more than you expect, as you say, it's that it's above that line. And I think that, for many people in the hustle and bustle of the daily world, it's easy to slip into just the expected. And for me, I'm going to go out on a limb here. I don't think that's a sustainable way of doing business, because I feel like you're going to be constantly having to chase new leads, new business, and ultimately it's an expensive way to run a business. And frankly, I don't know about you, but unfulfilling, because I want to have relationships with my patients. I want to get to know them. I like people. Most dentists I know like people.
There is a universal law around this reciprocity. If you feel, that you've been treated a certain way, there's a natural instinct to want to give back. And as a customer, giving back is just keep showing up.
Yeah.
Keep showing up, and telling your friends and family. And, to your point, to practice what I preach, this period of 2020 has shown me more than ever how much I value human connection. I think I always knew I valued it, but really this year it's made me stop and appreciate all those who have come before this moment in my journey, my past clients, my current clients, and supported me, supported my business. And I've taken these last few weeks to sit down and write each of my customers, past and current, a handwritten letter. And I'm not asking them to do anything. It's not a sales pitch. Again, I don't want to leave my gratitude to chance. I don't want to assume that they really understand how much I appreciate their customer. And so I've written a letter to each of them to just express my gratitude and genuine appreciation for, them trusting me and supporting my business. And it feels good when you do that. It feels good to serve and care for people with no expectation in return, just because that's what a good human does.
Yeah. Again, I'm reminded of a presentation I heard from Brené Brown, and I'm a bit of a fan of Brené Brown's work, and she spoke about connection as giving meaning and purpose to human existence. And I think ultimately, if you're in a service-based business, rather than selling wheel nuts, for instance, we're in a service-based business where it is all about the human connection, and it is all about that human experience. And I think if we can cultivate that with intention and be mindful and present, then we've got a much better chance of achieving that. So I really appreciate that. I wanted to just address a myth for a second.
I like myths. Please do.
Yeah. And there's a myth that, in dentistry, as I said, there's a bit of a push in some quarters, not all, to a more transactional based business. And the feeling is that type of business will scale more readily than a more service-based business. So if we've got people listening to this particular episode who want to run a more service-based, customer service focused, customer-centric business, one that has meaning, connection, and all those things, I want to ask, firstly, do you believe that kind of business can scale as well as any other? And secondarily, what are some of the key things to consider if you're going to go down that journey? I know we've touched on some already, but beyond that.
Well, scale, when I hear the word scale, I think about reach and, size of your database, your customers. And so arguably you have a team, and somehow we've got to make sure that our team believe similar things that we believe, and therefore behave in ways that we would behave as an owner. And so there's a lot to be said around this idea that as business owners and leaders, we serve first. We serve our team first, so they feel what it feels like to be treated a certain way inside, internal, before we even look at our customers. And my strong belief, not just based on what I think, but what I see, is that those organizations that really succeed and thrive and are in it for the long game, they get their house in order inside first. And service is an inside job. I think one of the mistakes that businesses make is they go, okay, let's focus on service, and they externalize it and they make it all about the customer. But I like to sometimes drop the word customer and say, let's just talk about service. Let's just talk about how we're all treating each other in this business. How am I, as a business owner or leader, serving you? How do we serve each other? What's the language we use, our behaviors? What do we role model? Because there's a good chance that that's a mirror image of what's happening when we treat our customers. Yeah. And so this whole idea of the employee's experience is just as important as the customer's experience. There's plenty of research and data to show us that this is not a myth. This is real. And if I was wanting to build a scalable business, I'd be putting all my bets on the future by starting inside the business first and really focusing on the quality of the culture, the service culture within, trusting and knowing that is having a ripple effect with all of our external stakeholders.
Yeah, love that. And again, so let's bust that myth. It can be done, right? And totally can be done. And so for those people listening to this, I'd really encourage you to go back and have a listen to what Jacquie's just spoken about for the last, a minute or thereabouts. Because I think if you want to have a business that does scale, or a business that goes beyond yourself at least, then ultimately it's going to come back to team, and therefore it's going to come back to, as you say, having an inside look at that and seeing it as an inside job first before it becomes an outside job. So let's just address that head and front on, because yes, a service-based business can scale as well as any other. So if you want to have reach beyond yourself, whether it's one practice, two practices, or one big practice, it doesn't mean by definition that you have to go down a transactional path. Far from it. So let's just address that.
Yeah, and it's a service-based business has got to be at the core of the DNA of the business.
Yeah.
If it's something that we just perform and show up and do with our customers, it isn't actually who we're being behind the doors. And therefore we're leaving inconsistency to chance again. So, I think of it like, in Greece, when I travel to Greece, my partner's Greek, the Greeks over there, they love to keep their front porches really tidy and clean.
Yep.
And you always see the yayas and papuls out there sweeping the front porch to make sure that the neighbours and all the passing by people can see how tidy and presentable their home is. But if you go inside and the place is chaotic and dirty and it's not in order, then it's inconsistent with who we're being. We're just putting on a show for when we feel like it. So if you really need to sustain your business and you absolutely want it to be a service-based business and you want this to go on for many years and scale and reach many people, it has to start inside and it's got to start with you.
Yeah. Love that. Jacquie, there's a lot that we could talk about when it comes to service, and obviously this is a massive topic, but I just want to touch on one little theme before we wrap up. I want to touch on the work that you do in meditation and mindfulness and so on and so forth. And we've kind of come back and forth to this topic a bit because I know when we think of those two topics, we don't always see them coming together. And I know it's about being present. I get that and I understand that. But what is that intersection look like in detail? Because again, I know there's a lot of people listening to this podcast who are interested in both topics, but may not have actually joined the dots between them. So can you just explore that intersection for us, please?
Well, if you think about the benefits that come with a routine, regular meditation practice that both you and I, Jessie, understand, it brings a sense of clarity of the mind. It brings a sense of calm, and it also brings a sense of joy and happiness, particularly over time. And I don't know about you, but when I'm served by people, I want them to be calm. I want them to be clear-headed, and I want them to be really joyous when they serve me.
Especially in a dental practice.
Exactly. And one of the things that we've all probably seen more than ever this year is that there's a lot of things that we can't control in life.
Yeah.
And there's a great saying that I often tell myself, which is control the controllables. And they're very few that we can control, but one of them is the quality of our thoughts and our state of mind. And so for me, the meditation practice, the mental training is almost a non-negotiable when it comes to me being the best that I can be each day for the people that I'm serving. Because let's face it, life throws us curveballs. The external world, there's always things that's going to happen in a day that I can't predict and I certainly can't control. But what I can control is my response to it, the way I relate to it. I can even get some space and separation between me and that experience, and my relationship to the event can be changed by the way I control my thoughts. Now, the only way to build that muscle and build that strength is through meditation. So mindfulness is the outcome, but meditation is the practice for greater mindfulness. And it's just like going to the gym. It's just like healthy eating habits. It's just that we're building muscle in our mind so that we can respond. And rather than responding with big change and big reactions, the more we meditate, the more our responses become quite natural. And, you know, we almost don't react as much as what we might have, you know, several years ago. So I think it just comes back to that whole idea that if we are a customer and we're showing up, particularly, I mean, let's face it. One thing I haven't shared with you, Jessie, is I used to have enormous anxiety around going to the dentist, enormous, as a customer. And it was, I don't know where it came from. I don't know why, because I never had any trauma or any major issues with my teeth. But from a very young age, there was so much fear about going to a dentist. And all of it was in my mind, all of it.
Yep.
And so finding someone in Melbourne who could really help me, not just with the practical solutions that I need with my teeth and my gums, but actually put me at ease and make me feel like I'm in good hands. The dentist that I see, he has this calm, present, grounding energy that when I walk into his room, I feel like he's really with me and I feel like I'm in good, safe hands.
Yeah.
And he's not putting that on. I can tell, he swims every day, he meditates every day. I can tell that this is who he's being. But it's a skill that we need to practice because our modern world is completely, we're overstimulated. We're not meant to sit in front of screens all day. We're not meant to go at the pace that we're going at every day. Human beings, we need to rest our thinking mind.
Yeah.
And as I said, those that are extraordinarily present deliver extraordinary service.
So again, we've spoken about serving the customer. We've spoken about serving the team. It's also about serving ourselves so that we can be the best leader to help the team, to help the customer ultimately.
Beautiful.
Yeah, love that. Jacquie, you've been incredibly generous with your time today. I want to say thank you from all of us here at Savvy Dentist. This is a big topic that I'm sure we could spend days, weeks, months talking about. Ladies and gents, if you are thinking that this is something that's going to be helpful and useful in your practice, which I believe it should be, then I'd really encourage you to head across to Jacquie's website, jacquiescammel.com. Have a look at the resources there. There's, books there. There's resources. There's some, kits and downloads there that I'd really encourage you to go and have a look at to start your journey in this space. And again, I think it's a really, really lovely methodology that Jacquie has articulated in such a clear and concise and practical way. So again, Jacquie, thanks so much for taking the time today. You're an absolute gem.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to the Savvy Dentist podcast with Dr. Jaquie Green. For more free tools and resources, join the free Facebook group. Visit drjessiegreen.com/Facebook. And for more episodes, visit drjessiegreen.com/savvydentist.